either way, right? You're either going into the future, you want to see what happens. If you go back, you could see mistakes you made, you could prevent them, you could relive good moments. Any of those, totally fine. But it's, as we kind of talked about, it's easy to get caught up in either one, whether you're going back or you're going forward into the future. But what those do is both of them, and I did this on purpose to you, is make you get away from the present moment and get away from right where you are right now. There's a quote that gets used in a lot of contexts that says, be where your feet are, meaning be present in the moment and your circumstances. And that's what our buddy Joseph is going to display today. This is the 4th week of our series on Joseph, and I want to recap kind of where we've been quickly here. So Joseph was the favorite son of Jacob. He was given that very famous coat or robe, and then he also had dreams showing some authority over his family. This caused his brothers to despise him so much that they threw him in a pit and sold him to the traders. The traders in Egypt then sold him to a fella named Potiphar, the big military guy. Well, he rose up the ranks in Potiphar's house to the point where he oversaw everything. But then last week, as we heard, Potiphar's wife seduced him, and even though Joseph refused, she lied, saying he tried to rape her, which then got Joseph thrown into prison with the king's prisoners. And that's where we're going to pick it up today. And we're going to see how Joseph is going to be faithful right there in prison, right where his feet are, right in his circumstances. And the thing is, we need to do the same. We need to be faithful where our feet are. Be faithful where your feet are. So we're going to read Genesis 40 in a few different sections, and then we're going to talk about being faithful where your feet are. So we'll start with Genesis chapter 40. We're going to start verses 1 through 8. It's bookmarked on the Bibles on your tables. Kyle will have it here on the screens. If you're following along, phones, tablets, all great. I will be in the NIV translation per usual. So here is Genesis 40, verses 1 to 8. It says, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard and the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the 2 men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night. Each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dream." So it says sometime later. Joseph's been in prison for a while now. All right, this is not like the next day. It's been a while. So we have the cupbearer and the chief baker thrown into prison for some offense. We're not sure exactly what they are. Cupbearer is actually a very important role in this day and age. They would bring the king their drinks, in essence, to make sure they weren't poison towards the king. They might provide some counsel. They had to be really trustworthy and devoted. Chief baker, similar, kind of the main baker for Pharaoh, for the king. He's labeled the chief. Now, they get thrown in prison. Again, we're not sure what for, but they get put under the care of Joseph, who is once again rose up the ranks in prison. So he's under their care. Now, both men apparently have dreams on the same night. So once again, we're seeing dreams coming in pairs. Okay, we saw this with Joseph, dreams in pairs. Now, the men are sad. It says they're dejected because nobody's there to interpret. The Egyptian belief was actually that there were like these professional interpreters that would come in and try to interpret dreams. They would consult books and commentaries, and it was their job to interpret the dreams. But there isn't one of those in prison. Joseph responds, "Hey, dream interpretation comes from God, so tell me your dreams." Meaning Joseph believes that with God, he can interpret their dreams. So what are their dreams? Let's find out. Genesis 49 to 15, the first dream. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me. And on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "Well, this is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land out of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in the dungeon." So we have the cupbearer's dream, and it centers around a grapevine. This is appropriate since he was a cupbearer, and wine came from the grapevine. So he sees a vine with 3 branches, and it blossoms, and the clusters then ripen into grapes. And the cupbearer is holding Pharaoh's cup, and he squeezes the grapes, and it comes out into Pharaoh's cup. Well, Joseph said the 3 branches are 3 days. So in 3 days, the cupbearer is going to be lifted up and restored to his position. That phrase lifting up here in this case means being restored, elevated back up. Joseph then asks, when this happens, remember me. Show me kindness. Because Joseph's like, hey, I've been wrongly imprisoned. I was sold as a slave. So if the cupbearer gets restored and lifted up, surely the same thing could happen to Joseph. So we got a pretty good outlook on the cupbearer's dream. What about our friend the chief baker? Let's find out. Genesis 40, 16 to 19. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kind of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is what it means, Joseph said. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. So the baker's dream. Yeah, right. Not great. The baker has 3 baskets of bread on his head. The bread presumably for Pharaoh, but instead of Pharaoh getting to eat the bread, it's eaten by birds. Once again, 3 baskets, 3 days, just like the cupbearer. So we're looking at 3 days again. This time, though, the baker, he's going to be lifted up, but to the point where he is dropped and impaled on a pole, and the birds will eat his flesh. So not lifted up to be restored, but to be killed. Now, we aren't told why he will suffer this fate. We don't know what he did wrong. For whatever reason, Pharaoh is going to have him killed. Okay? Well, let's see how this all plays out. If it all goes as Joseph interprets the last part of 40, 20 to 33. It says, now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that once again he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So it's been the 3 days, and it says it's Pharaoh's birthday, probably not his actual birthday, but the birthday of his coronation and becoming Pharaoh. And with that comes a big old celebration. We're going to have a feast. They had feasts a lot in ancient times. So good idea. Let's do it. So Pharaoh decides he's going to lift up the heads of the cupbearer and the baker in the presence of all the guests. This is part of the program. So he brings them both out of prison. Cupbearer gets restored to his position. Things are good. He's back. He's cupbearer again. The chief baker impaled on the pole. Why that's part of the programming, I don't know, but that was part of what happened. So Joseph's interpretations played out in real life, and he's still in prison. And then it says the cupbearer forgot about Joseph. Pays no mind. He's back to his position. It's all good. Joseph's still in prison. The main idea here, though, is that even while in prison, Joseph was faithful. He was faithful where his feet were, and that's what we need to be. Faithful where your feet are. And the first part of doing that is we have to see and serve. To see and serve. The men were in prison just like Joseph. He sees, it says he sees they were dejected in verse 6. Joseph took notice and then asked them what's going on. He sees them and then serves them by interpreting their dreams. I thought about the parable of the Good Samaritan with this. We have an image of it right here. This is, I think, a rendering of the painting Van Gogh did of it. But if you're not familiar with the Good Samaritan, it comes from Luke 10. And what happens is Jesus is asked the question, who is my neighbor? And he responds by telling the parable of the Good Samaritan. Well, it's a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he's attacked, he's robbed, and he's beaten and left for dead on the road. And a priest comes by, but just goes to the other side. He sees him sort of, but really just passes him by. Then a Levite comes by, does the same thing, passes by on the other side. But then a Samaritan. Samaritans were not looked highly upon, right? They weren't people that were all loved. But he stops. He sees, he stops, he helps, he takes him to an inn, bandages his wound, pays for the room and extra nights. See, the first two should have seen and served, but the Samaritan actually did. You can kind of see him here on the road. They're passing by, like they're not even seeing him, but the Samaritan saw and served. We need to see and serve. We have to see others as they are in their situation. See, Joseph was in prison, but he didn't make the struggle of these other two, of the cupbearer and the chief baker, his own. He could relate, but he didn't make those stories his. They were still theirs. He kept it about them. That's what we need to do. And here's the thing. To do that well, first, have your own solitude time with God. To see others well, first take yourself to God and just be with God. Here are those spiritual disciplines. Again, we keep coming back to them, and we're going to keep doing it. Work out your own stuff with God. Talk to God about your own struggles, successes, questions, whatever. We can't and shouldn't ignore ourselves. Bring it to God, and once we do that, it's actually easier to really see and serve others for who they are and where they are. right? We've done that. We've taken our stuff to God, and now when we're with others and around others, we really focus on them. See them for where they are. Hear and listen to what they're saying. Be a faithful listener right where your feet are. Maybe that's right where your ears are. People around you have stuff going on, and see them and hear them with humility and with grace. The two men Joseph encountered were in prison. They're in prison. Seemingly, maybe they've done something wrong. They've at least offended Pharaoh. Joseph didn't judge them. He didn't condemn them. He showed grace. He showed humility. If you've ever maybe heard someone in a struggle or something's gone wrong or something's going on, ever get that temptation? You just a little bit to judge them, to analyze their situation, to try and fix it yourself? I mean, it's really their fault they're in this mess, right? Or if they had just done this differently, they wouldn't be there. Well, what I would have done is this, or what I did when I was in that situation. It might be true you have advice. You might have really good advice. It might be true that whatever mess they're in, maybe they did do something that caused it. But it's still their story, their situation, and seeing them and hearing them isn't judging or fixing. It's seeing them with the grace and humility of Jesus. With compassion. That is such a great word. Compassion. An awareness of another person's suffering and a desire to alleviate it. Colossians 3:12 teaches us to clothe ourselves with compassion, literally put it on. Joseph listened, and he served by interpreting. The Good Samaritan saw and had compassion for the man that was beaten on the road. How can you have compassion on the people you see and hear? And this is totally contextual because it's whatever that person needs. It might be something practical you give them. It might be you're giving them wisdom or that advice if that's what they need and ask for. Maybe you're helping them find professional help. Or maybe you're just sitting there and listening and letting them talk. In the pastoral care group I'm in, we use table imagery. And we say when we have something going on, we place it on the table. And if nothing else, we're able to put it there so that other people are holding it with us. And it is no longer as heavy for just us. And I can tell you how insanely helpful that is for me at least. See and serve. Be faithful right where your feet are. And then remember, God's power and authority is everywhere. Wherever God is, which is everywhere, there is God's power and authority. See, Joseph tells the two men, interpretations belong to God, not to some of these professional interpreters and their books. I love books, but it still belongs to God. He says, tell me the dreams, and with God's authority, I'll interpret them. Joseph believed that God's power and authority was right with him in prison. It's like God's power and authority is like really portable. It's getting to be nice weather out, right? And with that comes one thing I enjoy, weirdly, which is yard work. I like to putz around in my yard. Two of the yard work tools I have a trimmer and I have a leaf blower. I have others. Those are the two we're going to use for sake of this illustration. See, my leaf blower is electric, so I got to plug it in. Well, here's the thing. I have like one outlet in my garage. So I have to run a 100-foot plus extension cord just to get to the corners of my yard to use it. It's kind of annoying. My wife can tell you I get frustrated with this massive extension cord and having to use it. I've talked about buying a battery-powered one. That's a whole other story. But I haven't done it. But then my trimmer is battery-powered. That baby, just plug in the battery. I can go to any part of the yard. I can go all over the place. I go do the neighbors if I want to because it's portable, right? It goes around. God's power and authority is more like that battery-powered tool. It goes wherever. Okay, it goes everywhere. It's accessible everywhere. We just got to be ready to have it plugged into us. 2 Corinthians 4:7 says we have this treasure in jars of clay to show us that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Wherever we go, wherever our feet are, the power and authority we act under comes from God. And he gives that power and authority to any of us. He doesn't just give it to those with degrees or with titles or with age, or with experience, or with status, or if you drive the best car, or have the best sneakers on. It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with any of those. You want to have some dope sneakers, go for it. But that doesn't mean we get more power and authority from God. God's power and authority comes as an anointing and a gift from God as he gives it out. We just have to discern God's voice in our lives. So what is God saying to you right here and right now? Right where your feet are, listen right now. Don't think, hey, I'll finish this up first, then I'll go listen. Or I got to get some more ducks in a row, then I'll go listen. Joseph didn't do that. He's like, hey, once I get out of prison, guys, I'll come back and interpret these dreams. He didn't do that. He did it while still in prison, in a pretty terrible and unfair circumstance, but he did it. So are you willing to listen right now? Are you willing to act on God's authority and God's power if he's leading you right now? Not on your own strength, no matter how strong you are, Not on your own intellect or street smarts. I know how smart all of you are. But acting on what God says and discerning if it's God's voice, not your own voice, not all the voices we hear around us, whether they're written or posted or whatever. Discern God's voice and know how he wants to display his power and authority. It might not be what you expect. It might not happen right where you expect. It might happen sooner or later, right? The dreams of the two men in the story, they were going to come true and happen in 3 days. 3 days. Joseph, however, if we think back week 1, he was given dreams. But him having authority over his brothers and his family hasn't happened yet. Might come now, might come later. God's power and authority comes when he sends it, but it's always there. Faith where your feet are is faith that God's power and authority is always at work and present in some way, even if that means waiting to see it come true. And then faith where your feet are is about speaking truth right where you are, no matter how hard it is. The fact is, sometimes the truth does indeed hurt. I remember being a kid, I don't remember how old I was, probably 7 or 8, something like that, 9, going to like our little local carnival where I grew up in Watertown. There were some of my buddies who were all in line to go on the go-karts, right? Go-karts are like bumper cars, one of those. And they're all going through, and I get up to go in, dude looks at me and says, "Sorry, man, you're too short." Now, I've always been a little guy. But like all my friends are going in, I can't go because, but it was true. There was a line. They always have that dang line. I'm like, can I do it? No. The truth does matter, even though it hurts. It might sting. But the truth still matters. Ephesians 4:15 says, "Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ." Speak the truth in love. That means doing it without harshness or jealousy, but also without hiding or withholding. Without harshness or jealousy. Joseph could have actually been jealous about speaking the truth over the cupbearer. Cupbearer is going to be released from prison and restored to his position in just a few days. Joseph probably felt like he deserved that, but he spoke the truth in love. We need to speak the truth in love to someone when it means something awesome might be coming for them. And maybe we want something awesome, but it's coming for them. But remember back to part 1 from today, it's about them. That doesn't mean something good or awesome won't come for you at some point. Doesn't mean you don't deserve it, but it's about someone else. So be honest and honestly joyful with that other person. And if you find yourself being jealous when you need to speak that truth, go back to that antidote for jealousy we talked about a few weeks ago. Pray 1 part thanksgiving, 1 part patience, 1 part blessing. Be truthful to someone even if it's hard for you to hear the truth you need to give them. Be truthful when it's good for someone else. But then be truthful when it's hard for someone else to hear. The chief baker, Joseph, had to tell him that in his dream it meant in 3 days you were going to be killed. That's not a truth I would love to share with somebody else. But Joseph did it, and he did it in love, just like Ephesians 4 said. He was able to do it in love because he was connected with God and knew the truth was from God for the baker. So we have to be sure, first off, that the truth we're going to speak, especially when it's hard, is really from God. Is it biblically accurate? Is it what God is saying, or is it just your opinion wrapped up in a word from God? Is it truly God's words for this person that you need to deliver, or is it maybe your own judgment that you're wrapping up as something from God? I'd love to say that part never happens, but it does. That's why we need to be sure and discern and listen to see if it's God's truth that we are supposed to deliver. And there will be times when we are. When God gives you a word and some truth for somebody else and you need to deliver. Don't dance around it. Do it in love, but do it. And it might seem more loving and caring to not share it because it might be hard on that person, but that's not actually loving them. Speak the truth is what we're taught. Then when you've done that, I would encourage you, don't leave them alone right away if they're okay with having you around. Like, we don't know what happened in these 3 days between the dream interpretation and them being killed, but the men were still in prison, so Joseph seemingly would have still been there with them. So if the truth you deliver is hard, be willing to sit with the other person in that time if they're okay with that. The truth you deliver could be a variety of things, but it needs to come from God. It needs to be spoken in love and done faithfully right where your feet are. And as you are faithful where your feet are, not everyone else is always going to be faithful. Thankfully, God always is, but not everybody else is. See, Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and share his story. But the cupbearer was totally unfaithful and says he forgot about Joseph. He was all about himself, being restored back to his position, things are good. He was not faithful or upright towards Joseph. There are people in this world that are not uber faithful or upright. I heard this story I caught a few weeks ago. I saw it on USA Today about a theft. Now, theft in nature is not faithful or upright, and it's dishonest. But the story was about a guy from California who purchased Lego sets and then would return them back for the money without the pieces inside. And this would total somewhere like $34,000. But in many cases, what this fella did was took bags of like dried uncooked pasta and put them back in the box to like symbolize the sound and the shape of everything of the Lego pieces. There was one they said was upwards of $500, like this Avengers Tower. Talk about not being faithful or customer, or dude in this case, he's cheating everything, he's lying. People are not always faithful. Thankfully, God's always faithful no matter what. Romans 3:3-4 says, what if some were unfaithful? Will their unfaithfulness nullify God's faithfulness? Not at all. Let God be true and every human being a liar, as it is written, so that you may be proved right when you speak and prevail when you judge. Human unfaithfulness does not cancel out God's faithfulness. God's going to be faithful no matter how unfaithful Christians may be. The image and the nature of God should be reflected by us, those that follow him. But it's really easy to flip that and think that the actions of Christians are reflected by God. So if Christians are jerks, God must be a jerk. If Christians are judgmental, God must be judgmental. If Christians are unfaithful, God must be unfaithful. But that's not the way it works. We're supposed to reflect God who is always faithful. So we need to, one, reflect God well, and two, hold to the truth that God is faithful even if those around us are not. I have to believe that Joseph needed that truth. We're going to hear next week that it's been 2 years before anything changes. He's still sitting in prison. We'll get to that story next week. It wouldn't be a stretch to think Joseph started wondering or doubting God's faithfulness. It wouldn't be a stretch, but he doesn't do it. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, no matter what type of pit or prison you find yourself in, God's faithfulness never goes away. That means you always have God's presence. You always have God's peace. You always have God's grace. Always have God's forgiveness. Always have God's guidance. God is always moving and working. A number of times here, we're not singing it today, but we sung the song Waymaker. There's that lyric that says, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I can't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. When others leave or stop or let down, God stays, keeps going, and lifts up. God is faithful right where your feet are. We need to remember and hold to that, and also be faithful where our feet are. Be faithful where your feet are. We'll wrap up here. See and serve others right where you are. See others, serve others. It's all about them. And a hold to God's power and authority. Discern God's voice and listen for him giving you that power and authority. It all comes from him no matter where you are. And then speak the truth. Sometimes the truth is awesome. Sometimes the truth really hurts. But speak it in love. Even if it's hard for you or someone else to hear, don't dance around it. Speak the truth in love. And God's always faithful. We're supposed to reflect God well as his followers. It doesn't always happen. But even when it doesn't change who God is. God's always faithful even when everyone around seems unfaithful. We need to be faithful as well. Be faithful right here, right now. Be faithful where your feet are. Let's pray. God, I thank you for today. God, I thank you for the story of Joseph. God, that even in his situation, in prison, unfairly, God, that he was faithful to you. That he served others after he saw them. And God, that he remembered and held to your power and authority. God, I pray that we would do that whatever situation we're in, God, right here, right now, right where our feet are, that we would remain faithful to you. That we would see and serve others, we'd remember your power and authority, we'd speak the truth in love, but then, God, that we would hold to your faithfulness. That we would remember that with everything going on around us and in us, that your faithfulness never goes away. God, I thank you that you've promised your faithfulness to us and that it doesn't leave. God, I pray that we would respond to that by being faithful to you as well. In your name.